Two ancient artifacts, one real, one fake. How does an expert know the difference? And more important, how do we definitively answer the questions, is it real, and can you prove it?
If you're looking for easy answers, this is probably not the field for you. It is a constantly changing field. You're going layer after layer, one test after another, until you finally get enough evidence to be able to, with reasonable certainty, say that an object is a forgery or it's ancient. You get an idea of how much it's been restored, whether it's been altered, and it is a constantly changing field.
In fact, the truth about most antiquities resides in the murky past. Refusing to easily give up their secrets to one person or one process. And unraveling those mysteries takes experience, persistence, and that essential something else, science. It's called archaeometry, the sciences used to authenticate archaeological artifacts and works of art. And without it, anyone buying an artifact, whether it's from a dealer or an established auction house, is simply rolling the dice on whether the item is real or phony.
The science has been around for a long time, but public knowledge of it is so minimal that if you type in the word archaeometry, most computers don't even know what it is.
Really excellent, Phoenix. Most collectors, even museums, rely solely on expert opinion. And while what an expert says is important, it's still just an opinion. Science is the only reliable way to get a definitive answer. Dr. Ernst Pernitzka is an international archaeometrist. He has cracked some of Europe's biggest antiquities and art fraud cases. Pernitzka says his laboratory serves a growing number of collectors who want that higher standard of proof.
We get about 90% of fakes. So 90% of the objects that we are asked to investigate are fakes. A large fraction of even museums objects are not authentic, and this is something that I would like to do to screen some museum collections, but usually the curators are not really interested in knowing the truth, because sometimes they are responsible for buying those things, and then they lose their reputation if it turns out that they bought fakes. The ultimate goal is to know everything without even touching the object. This is, of course, impossible. So we usually persuade the owners to allow a minimal sampling, either by laser ablation with a laser beam, or we take a very, very small sample, which is also hardly seen by the naked eye with a scalpel. We apply a relatively large number of methods, like we do radiocarbon dating in our laboratory, luminescence dating, so direct dating methods of various materials, methods that do not provide a date, but for instance the provenance of an object or the raw materials from which an object is made.
The essence of archaeometry is what Galileo said. If it is measurable, measure it. If it's not, make it so. Archaeometry, or archaeometric analysis, means two things. Archeo, meaning the study of ancient or archaeological material, and metric, meaning the measurement thereof. Take gold artifacts, for instance. Until recently, there was no reliable way to date gold, and therefore, talented forgers could spend small fortunes making a modern gold reproduction of an artifact in the hopes of making tens of millions of dollars by passing it off to an unwary collector as the genuine article. Quite a magic trick, but a trick nonetheless. Once again, science provides the solution. Meet Professor Otto Eugster, a physicist who was instrumental in developing the gold dating technique.
Authenticating archaeological gold objects is a major problem, as gold is probably the most difficult material for detecting modern forgeries. But with our method, based on a physical process, We have a powerful tool to distinguish between an object manufactured in ancient times and a modern object. When gold crystals are formed in the Earth's crust, other elements, such as uranium, are incorporated into the crystal lattice of gold. Thus, gold from mines and found in riverbeds always contains traces of uranium and of many other elements. Uranium is not stable. It decays by emitting helium atoms. This is a natural process called radioactive decay, and we know how fast this process goes. Gold is a very tight material, and helium remains in gold unless the gold is heated to 1000 degrees Celsius. Then the helium gas leaves the gold, and its amount can be measured. The amount of helium that comes out of the gold has been accumulated and stored in the object since it last melting. That means since the gold object has been manufactured. In our laboratory, we use a piece of a few milligrams of gold taken from a gold object and measure the helium and uranium contents in this little grain. Because the helium and uranium amounts are very low, we use special instruments called mass spectrometers. In fact, the method using helium and uranium for dating has been applied and refined in space research in order to date lunar rocks and meteorites.
Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture. You're in our field of view now.
Forgery of ancient artifacts and art is a global business, a multi-billion-dollar industry yearly. At this level, we're talking about master forgers, talented artists in their own right. And they have at their disposal the ability to discolor metals like bronze to make them appear ancient, to reproduce pottery with genuine ancient clay, and to paint and craft in styles that are from a particular dynasty or era with great accuracy.
One of the big forgery tricks is to actually use ancient material to try to defeat all the tests that we do. So I've got some blocks of truly ancient pottery here. This is thousands of years old. And they could do one of two things. They might take these pieces and cut some nice straight edges and glue them together and then recarve the surface to make it look like some new object, and then they'll disguise it, they'll distress it and cover up the seams. Or they might take a piece and just smash it, and then mix that with some kind of a binder and adhesive, and then reshape it. And the reason they do that is that if you're using ancient material, then when you do this wonderful scientific test, a thermoluminescence test, or TL test, it will show that the material is ancient.
Thermoluminescence test, or TL test, is basically they take a sample of the material. The mica and other elements in the clay absorb radiation from the atmosphere at a given rate. When the piece is fired, when it reaches a critical temperature, as in the kiln, it releases all that stored energy from nature, and the clock starts again at zero. So by taking a small sample of the material, putting it in a mass spectrometer, measuring the amount of energy that's released when you heat it to the critical temperature, you can then determine the last time the piece was heated to critical temperature, giving you an accurate date of manufacture.
In order to get around the forger's new technique of using ancient material, you have to go steps further. One of the steps you might do would be to x-ray the piece. If you x-ray the object and you find these straight seams and these perfect joints, sometimes you find clay of different densities, you can tell that they've taken unrelated pottery, cut it up, stuck it together, recarved it. One of the things forgers will do with metal is to color it, to patinate it. There are lots of ways that metal will change color naturally with age, a lot of different appearances it can take, but a lot of people associate a thick incrustation with age. And you can fake that pretty easily, especially with copper-based objects, brass and bronze. Forgers will take something as simple as salt, and that can be used to create an aggressive type of corrosion that will create a very thick incrustation, sometimes in as little as a few days. Certainly within a week to 2 weeks you can get thick incrustations of green corrosion. And when we are sent pieces to study that were purchased from outside collections, oftentimes that's what we find on forgeries, is salt-based corrosion on modern objects. One of the major problems in archaeometry is having the appropriate database with which to work, and this is a prime example of that. This is virtually identical to a piece that is in, I believe, the Freer Gallery of Art. It is Sasanian, or the Sasanian style. But this piece, unlike the one in the Smithsonian, was probably made in Central Asia, quite probably by non-Sasanian craftsmen. There have been a lot of tests done on this. It's passed a lot of the scientific tests that we do to show that there is evidence of age, that it is a genuine artifact. But there are still some people who specialize in studying Sasanian art who will not accept that it could potentially be real because the method of manufacture is a little different than what they're accustomed to.
The amount of natural material available to the people to create their artifacts was distinct. So you can't take a particular period, a particular dynasty that covers half a millennium or even a millennium and say that all of these pieces from this era used this iconography. All of the pieces from this area used this construction technique. All of the pieces from this area used this particular alloy formula. All of these are quite distinct even within the same empire. Therefore, you have to have the correct database. You have to have knowledge of all the cultural influences of each of the dynasties.
So this piece is an example of how you can use the wrong database and come up with the wrong answer. Based on the database we currently have, talking about method of manufacture, this piece would be listed as a forgery. But based on all of the other scientific evidence, it is a genuine artifact.
Archaeometry is one of the single most important pursuits that we can have today to connect the past world and the contemporary world. Well, we're back to our two friends and our two questions. Is it real, and can you prove it? This noble attendant done in amber glaze is the winner. This is completely real. And our little friend here is a fake. The thermoluminescence test determined a rather interesting phenomena. The head is of the period, which is 618 to 906. The body is of a later time. In the 40 years or plus that I've been doing this, there are two things that have been absolutely shocking to me. I mean, surprising almost beyond belief. One is that the communication between people involved in the similar discipline or people involved even in the commercial aspects do not talk to each other. They do not exchange information. The second shocking thing was that pieces of immense historical consequence were being offered to the world with no scientific documentation, no corroboration using anything involved with an empirical method. You have consensus opinions, but none of them have any basis either. Here you have an entire industry, an entire profession offering goods to the world's museums which document civilization for the population in general. And it's done on a best guess basis. I never thought that could be possible. But those two things made me realize that I had to go in an entirely different direction.